I'm Ken Rockwell on kenrockwell.com, here on kenrockwell.tv. Let's today take a look at Nikon's 20mm f1.8 lens for their Z series of camera. Most importantly, let's take a look at some of the pictures I can take with this lens. This shot is typical. This is shot wide open at f1.8 on my Z7. Now this is a still image, and I'm zooming and panning here in my video editing software. This is shot wide open at f1.8 for 25 seconds down at ISO 64. And that's the pro secret. If you're shooting something that doesn't move, always shoot at the lowest ISO you can. You'll get the sharpest image. Don't go shooting at 200 or 400 because you'll lose just a little bit of sharpness. If you go to my online review where I have sample image files you can download at kenrockwell.com, and I have the link in the description of this video, you can see for yourself how sharp this lens is. Of course, at the far corners, things aren't actually in focus. At f1.8, of course, there's not that much depth of field. And at the sides and the corners, it's not in focus. Also, in terms of the sharpness of this lens, I discovered it is super sharp, edge to edge, even at f1.8. However, there might be a little bit of field curvature, so you really have to make sure things are in perfect focus. But if they are, this lens is super sharp edge to edge. This lens is most useful for astronomical use. It's great for Milky Way shots. It's great for sports and action where you need the large apertures to be able to use short shutter speeds and low ISOs to get the best possible shots that you can't get with your zoom. For most people, the 14 to 30 millimeter zoom f4 is going to be a much more useful lens, but this is a great lens to have, and it is one of my favorite focal length and aperture combinations because it is so uniquely useful. And to be honest, I don't really need a 16 to 30 lens or a 14 to 30 lens. With 20 millimeters, I get what I want, and I grab my 20, and I grab something else like the 24 to 240, and I am good to go for everything. Comparatively, this is an expensive lens. It's actually the largest, heaviest, and most expensive 20mm lens ever made by Nikon, and I've owned them ever since the versions that were made back in the 60s, the 20mm f3.5. Here's what the comparison is. On the left, I have my Z lens, and on the right, I have my lens for my F-mount cameras. Now, if you add the FTZ adapter to this AFS lens works flawlessly on the Z cameras, and it is smaller, lighter, and significantly less expensive. And to be honest, for a lot of people, you might want to consider this AFS lens. They're both made in China. The serial number is laser engraved on the bottom. It's always got manual focus instant override. Just grab this big ring. This whole ring here is the focus ring. Grab that at any time, and bingo, you've got instant manual focus override, which is something you don't get on the other brands of mirrorless cameras, which oftentimes don't respond instantaneously unless you program some menus and then only work in certain situations. Other than this trim ring here, which is the metal focus ring, and this trim ring back here, most of the lens is plastic. All this front section is plastic. The filter threads are plastic. This front identity ring is plastic. This piece of barrel back here is plastic. The insides, I can't really tell, but it looks like it's probably got plenty of plastic. This does not give me the confidence of being an heirloom grade lens like their manual focus lenses are. But hey, I don't think you guys are buying any of these cameras to expect to use them in 40 years from now. The recycling thing has got a 10, like most electronic equipment, meaning they expect you'll throw this away in about 10 years. The Leica lenses, I think, have about a 20 or a 50 in that circle. I can easily stack at least 4 77mm filters on this lens with no vignetting on full frame. You'll see there's a lot of space here at the sides, so you probably could stack more. I just didn't have any more handy, so don't worry about having to buy thin filters. What's weird or what's missing is it only stops down to f16. It doesn't stop down to f22 like a lot of other lenses do. It has no stabilization. Admittedly, Nikon has never made a fixed 20mm lens with stabilization. This lens is hoping your camera can do that, but to be honest, in-camera sensor shift stabilization can work fantastically well with an ultra-wide lens in the center. It can't work in the corners. So if you're using that and working in iffy situations, say eighth, quarter, half, full second, and getting sharp results in the center, but not getting sharp results in the sides, don't blame it on the lens. It's probably the stabilization system not being able to correct camera shake at the sides of the image. And why is that simple? The image grows as it gets to the corners in order to keep the line straight. And I'll skip you the geometry, but the key is the sensor with an ultra-wide lens actually has to stretch further on the corners than it does in the center. And unless your sensor is made out of rubber, it's not going to do that. There's no aperture ring. That's sad, but that's a system defect. There's no VR switch to control in-camera VR. I really wish it had that, so I threw this on a tripod. I can just have it switch. No, the only switch you've got is auto manual focus. This is a full-frame lens. Sure, it works great on a DX camera, but then you're paying a premium price, and getting the equivalent of a 30mm f1.8 doesn't make a lot of sense. This lens only works on Nikon's Z series of mirrorless cameras. It will not fit any digital SLR or any 35mm SLR, no matter what you do, simply because it has to get closer to the sensor. It gets about this close to the sensor, about 16mm. The SLRs have about 46mm, an extra 30mm or so. So you can't adapt this to any other kind of camera other than the Nikon Z. As you expect, it has pretty fancy optics. It has 14 elements and 11 groups. It has 3 ED elements, but notice it does not have the gold ED band. Nikon got cheap. Other ED lenses like this one have this gold band that signifies ED for extra low dispersion glass, which is something Nikon specialized in since the 1970s. No, this lens, just basic black. And it also has 3 aspherical elements. There's a multi-group internal focusing system, so there's more than one group of elements moving around as you change your focus. It claims to have a nanocrystal coating, and there's really no problem with flare. The diaphragm is 9 blades, and they're rounded. The hood is the usual plastic affair, and it's included. There's no case included. Nikon includes this cloth sack and calls it a case, the CLC1. Well, you can call it a case if you want to, but it's not. I find a tube sock works better if you want to throw this in a backpack. Autofocus speed is only moderate, but that could be a function of my Z7, which doesn't exactly win any prizes for fast autofocus. Manual focus works great. Just grab this big ring. The focus breathing, the image gets a little bit smaller as you focus it more closely, although in actual use, at legitimate distances that you'd be using this lens, if you're actually photographing actors and actresses, then I wouldn't worry about focus breathing. The bokeh isn't very important because the lens like this is almost never anything that far out of focus. Here's the most out of focus you can get. This is at about headshot distance, and this is at f1.8, and the bokeh is fairly neutral. The Nikon Z cameras usually correct distortion automatically. What's weird is there's a little bit of barrel distortion left that you're never going to see, but you will if you get a ruler out with the automatic correction left on. If you turn the automatic correction off and then go looking for distortion, yes, you will see some. And the exact coefficients and so forth and all the details are in my written review at kenrockwell.com, to which I link in the description. Shot with Nikon's vignette control left to normal, there's no visible fall off. And if you go out of your way to turn off the vignette control, yeah, you will see some fall off at f1.8 and f2, but then it goes away. There are no lateral color fringes as shot as JPEGs on Nikon's cameras, which have automatically corrected that forever. If you shoot as RAW and then open it in other than Nikon software, it's entirely probable that the lateral color, if there is any, wouldn't be corrected, and then you might see some, but don't come complaining to me. Macro gets really close. For 20mm lens, as I said, it gets about this close in the front of the lens. The problem is, you'll see here in the bottom right that you cast a shadow. It's really tough to get light on your subject when you've got your subject this close to this big fat lens. And the good news is, it is pretty sharp, although there is a little spherochromatism, a little bit of spherical aberration, so if you're not in perfect focus, you're going to get some of these little color fringes that you see. And of course, as you stop down, it improves greatly. Mechanically, it's an almost all-plastic, Chinese-made lens. It's got glass for glass, and the mount is metal, but that's about it. It combines the benefits of a pro-level price with offshored quality, and it's just what Nikon likes to give us today. It does have a dust gasket back here. If you shake it, it has the tiniest bit of clicking from the diaphragm. It does have a fairly healthy amount of spherochromatism, but I can't imagine you actually wanting to shoot this close and then worrying about it, because you never can really get anything that far out of focus with this lens. Spherochromatism isn't going to be a concern. But if it is a concern for you in particular, this lens does have a healthy dose of it. Image stabilization, I get about a 3-stop real-world improvement on my Z7, but beware, as I covered at the beginning, don't expect the corners to be as well corrected for vibration and camera shake as the center. For Sunstars, ignore the vertical smear. That's interline transfer smear at the largest apertures. As I go to smaller apertures, it actually gives me a fairly nice Sunstar. It gives me about an 18-point Sunstar, and it's a fairly healthy, sharp Sunstar, so I would say Sunstars are pretty good on this lens. And that's all there is to say. It's a great little lens, although it's not that little. For most people, I would get the 14 to 30mm f4, or you could get the 14 to 24mm 2.8. But if you need a super fast, ultra-wide lens, this is your choice for Nikon, and it is a great choice. Thanks again for watching KenRockwell.com here on KenRockwell.tv.